Joe Biden's Ping Putin profit plan is in full effect. What is it? Wilkow starts now. Welcome to the program. I'm Andrew Wilkow. China and Russia have never, ever had a better man in Washington than Joe Biden. And I'm going to coin something here. The Ping Putin profit plan. No, it's not actually anything official, but there is an ongoing effort to clamp down on American energy by the Biden administration, and the only beneficiaries are China and Russia. And if you remember, on the campaign trail, Donald Trump said this was going to happen.
While my administration is fighting for workers like you, the radical left, have you ever heard of the radical left, Brian? You don't want to hear about them. You don't want to know about them. Is fighting to abolish American energy, destroy the oil and gas industries, and wipe out your jobs.
Don't act shocked. Biden said he was going to do it.
Would you close down the oil industry?
By the way, I would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I would
that's
transition.
a big statement.
It is a big statement.
That's a
because
big statement.
I would stop.
Why would you do that?
Because the oil industry pollutes significantly.
I see.
Here's the deal. But
That's
you
a
can't
big
do
statement.
that. Well, if you let me finish the statement, because it has to be replaced by renewable energy over time. And I'd stop giving to the oil industry, I'd stop giving them federal subsidies. He won't give federal subsidies to the gas, to solar and wind.
Yeah.
Why are we giving it to oil industry?
We actually do give
All
it
right.
to solar and wind.
We
And
have
that's
one
maybe the
final
biggest
question.
statement in terms of business. That's the biggest statement.
Okay.
Because
We have
basically
one
what he's
final
saying
question,
is he is
Mr.
going to
President.
destroy the oil industry. Will you remember that, Texas? Will you
Okay.
remember that, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma?
Vice President Biden, let me give you 10 seconds to respond, and then
Ohio.
I have to get to the final question. Vice President Biden.
He takes everything out of context, but the point is, look, we have to move toward a net zero emissions. The first place to do that by the year 2035 is in energy production, by 2050 totally.
Every move the Biden administration is making on energy and the economy is benefiting China and or Russia. Full stop. On day one, President Biden canceled construction of an international oil and natural gas pipeline that would have supported thousands of American jobs and continued our forward motion as an energy independent nation and net exporter of energy. The next move was to lift sanctions on a European transnational pipeline so Germany can become even more dependent on Russia for oil and natural gas. Then, this is new, there's the denial of permits to mine rare earth materials to make the batteries that power the cars and trucks that the Democrats want to force us to drive, if we're even allowed to own private transportation at all. But by doing that, Biden is allowing China to increase its share of the market, not only in China, but also in Africa. Yeah, China is moving fast, really fast, on its mining operations in Africa. Why would the guy whose grandpa told him he was labor from shoe leather to belt buckle do such things? Well, because the communists have something on him. Isn't it funny, right? Ever since Merrick Garland took over the Department of Justice, we haven't heard a peep about the investigation into Hunter Biden's dealings in China. But okay, let's start with oil. Russian oil, to be specific. The Democrats tell us that fossil fuels are killing the planet, and they want to tax the American oil companies to death and run them out of existence. Biden has set the goal of the U.S. being carbon neutral by 2030, and there's something about carbon emissions affecting people of color, more something like that. But burning fossil fuels wasn't a problem when Biden's useless drug addict son was making millions sitting on the board of a Ukrainian oil company. And now it's all of a sudden not a problem that Germany wants to increase its dependence on Russia for oil and natural gas. Remember that time that Donald Trump tried to get German Hillary, that's Angela Merkel, to buy oil and natural gas from us, or at least Canada? We were warned that Germany would be giving Putin a massive amount of leverage over the largest economy in Europe.
To me, it is a tragedy. I think it's a horrific thing that's being done, where you're feeding billions and billions of dollars from Germany primarily, and other countries, but primarily from Germany, into the coffers of Russia, when we're trying to do something so that we have peace in the world. I think it's a horrible thing that Germany's doing. I think it's a horrible mistake. And as much as I like Angela, I was very open in saying it. I think it's a horrible thing that you have a pipeline coming from Russia. And I believe that Germany's going to be getting 50, 60, or even I've heard numbers of 70% of their energy coming in from Russia. And how can you be working for peace and working from strength when somebody has that kind of power over your country? I don't think it's good. You're not working from strength. You've given up all of your strength. I think it's very bad for Germany, very bad for the German people, and I don't think it's very good for NATO. You want to know the truth, so, okay?
Don't take it from us crazy conservatives here at Blaze TV. Here's from CNN. President Joe Biden on Tuesday stood by his decision not to sanction the company in charge of building Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, characterizing the move as protecting relationships with European allies. The administration's decision served as a win for Russian President Vladimir Putin, who many in Congress fear will now have greater leverage over Eastern Europe. It was also expected to infuriate Kiev. The pipeline will allow Russia to bypass Ukraine in shipping gas to the European Union through the Baltic Sea, depriving the Ukrainians of crucial revenue, unquote. Wow, you guys in the Ukraine must feel pretty stupid right now, right about now. What Biden did do, get this, was sanction one of the Russian pipeline companies after it completed its work on the pipeline. That'll show him. Putin is very happy. On to electric vehicles. Biden wants to spend $174 billion to forever alter the automobile market. But EV doesn't mean clean energy, at least not according to Biden's plan, where China is going to be the world's largest producer of rare earth materials, from Reuters. U.S. President Joe Biden will rely on ally countries to supply the bulk of the metals needed to build electric vehicles and focus on processing them domestically into battery parts, part of a strategy designed to placate environmentalists. Two administration officials with direct knowledge told Reuters the plans will be a blow to U.S. miners who had hoped Biden would rely primarily on domestically sourced metals, as his campaign had signaled last autumn, to help fulfill his ambitions of a less carbon-intensive economy. Rather than focus on permitting more U.S. mines, Biden's team is more focused on creating jobs that process minerals domestically into electric vehicle battery parts, according to the People. Such a plan would help cut U.S. reliance on industry leader China for EV materials. The idea that there has to be a choice between mining and battery production is ludicrous. We should have both. So first Biden kills oil jobs, now he's going to kill mining jobs. We have the rare earth materials right here at home. Under Trump, things were very different. Again, Reuters, but from 2020. The U.S. government is planning to fund domestic rare earths projects in an attempt to reduce its reliance on China. The global leader of specialized sector China has spent the last 30 years building a monopoly over the sector. Rare earths are no longer processed in the United States. In an attempt to change that, the Pentagon last year said it would fund mines and processors via the Defense Production Act, which gives the military wide berth to procure certain equipment. U.S. President Donald Trump has recently considered using the same law to boost medical supply manufacturing. The states so far listed with rare earth deposits are Alaska, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Texas, and Wyoming. According to WyomingMining.com, Wyoming not only has huge deposits of rare earth materials, but super high-grade materials too. You know, so many bougie Democrats want to be seen, you know, driving their electric vehicles because it's virtue signaling, but they just don't want the batteries, apparently, to be made in the USA from USA materials, right? Because somehow it's different if the Canadians mine right across the border from Montana. And Brazil and Chile are some of the allied nations that will provide rare earth. And of course, there's no worry about political instability in South America, right? Thanks, President Biden. Ping is very happy. And let's not forget that Hunter Biden has been scooping up millions in commie dollars in China. So Biden's rare earth mining ban is going to bolster China's portfolio. Well, the environmental left ought to worry. You see, Yale University did a study of China's extraction policies. Quote, as China began to produce more smartphones, wind turbines, electric vehicles, and other high-tech products requiring rare earth elements, the mining intensified, but the removal of these elements from the Earth's crust using a mix of water and chemicals caused extensive water and soil pollution. So the left in this country wants to force us into energy dependence. The Chinese are going to extract as much rare earth as possible with the least amount of concern for the environment. And the Chinese communists aren't going to stop there. Oh, no. They are already pushing forward in Africa. From mining.com, the scale of China's expansion in Africa is just mind-blowing. In less than 10 years since Chinese authorities called for mineral resources diversification globally, the number of major mining mineral processing assets in Africa with China-headquartered companies' interest increased from only a handful in 2006 to more than 120 in 2015. That was from 2015. That's 6 years ago. How much further do you think they are now? And note to the left, you know how you're always talking about how pollution affects people of color? Well, who do you think is going to be affected by pollution in Africa? The Democrats want the little people, that's you and me, on government-run transport, or at least to be nudged into electric vehicles. Remember what they said after the Colonial Pipeline hack?
We obviously are all in on making sure that we meet the president's goals of getting to 100% clean electricity by 2035 and net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And, you know, if you drive an electric car, this would not be affecting you.
Which, of course, you know, it's not like any of these people have family or friends invested in this whole EV thing, especially not Jennifer Granholm, the energy secretary from Fox. Energy Secretary Granholm's investment in electric vehicle battery companies sparks concern, as the Biden administration doesn't seem to be slowing down on its green energy agenda that includes electric vehicles. Granholm has until late August to fully divest up to $5 million in stock options from Proterra, a company that makes electric buses, car batteries, and charging stations. So here's the argument. Build back better really means build a better China and Russia. Russia and China can hire all the registered energy lobbyists they want, including Hunter Biden. There's nobody working harder to benefit the communist energy portfolios than Joe Biden himself. He's literally killing our energy sector to the benefit of Putin and Ping, and it's driving up their profits. Under Biden's watch, Russians hacked an existing pipeline and gas prices went through the roof. Higher energy prices means a slower economic recovery. It also means that the value of Chinese and Russian energy goes up. That's how the laws of supply and demand work. If there's more demand than supply, the price rises, and who holds the supply gets the riches. And in this case, it's China and Russia. Under President Trump, the U.S. became energy independent. Remember those gas prices? This gave us the opportunity to begin sales of oil and natural gas to our NATO allies in Europe, namely Germany, to sway them away from a growing dependence on Russian oil and natural gas. But thanks to Biden and the Democrats, we are going from all of the above to none of the above. And note to the greenies on the left, China and Russia, they don't give a spotted owl's hoot about environmental standards. And the more China carves up Africa, the more people of color are going to be affected by pollution. After Biden chokes the oil industry to death and China raises the price on EV batteries, I hope the 10% for the big guy was worth it. All right, I'm super excited to welcome back to the program a friend of mine. She was the Deputy National Security Advisor to former President Donald Trump and most recently authored the book Revolution: Trump, Washington, and We the People. Her knowledge about China and Russia is going to totally help us further the conversation from where I was in the monologue about oil, natural gas, and rare earth materials. KT McFarland, thank you so much for joining us.
It's always an honor and a pleasure, and I can't believe that you don't know just as much as I do about these topics.
Well, this is your wheelhouse. We couldn't think of anybody better to talk about this. Let's start with Vladimir Putin and the pipeline that now just had its sanctions lifted by President Biden. I thought we were trying to rid the world of oil and natural gas. I mean, I guess unless Hunter Biden is sitting on the board of directors of a Ukrainian oil and natural gas company. But Biden lifted the sanctions that's now going to allow the completion of this transnational pipeline from Russia to Germany. The foreign policy establishment, the Democrats and the media threw themselves on the floor when Donald Trump suggested to Angela Merkel that maybe the Germans should rely on the U.S. and Canada and not Russia. Now they're going to be able to rely on Russia, and Vladimir Putin is going to have so much leverage over Germany.
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. The Trump wanted to stop it. We wanted to stop it because what it will do is two things. One, it'll enrich Russia. I mean, it's a windfall profit for them, right? A gas pipeline to Germany, absolute cash in the bank. The second thing, though, is that it puts a lot of political leverage on Germany and on other countries in the European region, because Russia has shown in the past, whether it's the country of Georgia or whether it's Ukraine, they can flip the gas pipeline off whenever they want it. And then you're shivering in the dark in these countries. So the Russians then will have the whip hand over the German economy going forward. So my question to the Biden administration is, wait a minute, here's what's wrong with this picture. Germany needs us a lot more than we need them. So when you're saying that, well, we have to do this for the German interests, no, you don't. Secondly, if Germany is going to be dependent economically on Russia, why is the United States spending billions of dollars to defend Germany from Russia in the NATO alliance? It doesn't make any sense. And then the third thing is that the Biden administration is letting all of our NATO allies off the hook about contributing their fair share, the very hook that Donald Trump put them on.
Well, the Biden administration sanctioned a Russian company that was involved in the construction after they completed their work. What does that do? Allowing the sanctions to be lifted on the German companies that are going to complete the pilots, 95% complete. And now Vladimir Putin's going to be walking away with billions in euros. And as you said, Germany's going to be turning to the United States for defense through NATO. I don't understand this. If Vladimir Putin is who the Democrats and the media say he is, why would the Biden administration want him to profit from oil sales from our allies? And again, Trump made the case, if you're not going to buy it, at least buy it from Canada, but buy it from someone else.
Okay, so if Donald Trump were still president, here's what I think he would do. I think he would go to the German president, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and he would say, here's the deal. We're not going to let you do this pipeline. In fact, we're going to encourage you in a really big way. If you do build this pipeline, we're taking American forces out of Germany. And if you want to do an alternative to this pipeline, we're going to help you. We will even pay for liquid natural gas terminals to bring American gas, frack gas, natural gas to Germany. You know, it's so easy to do this the right way, and yet for some reason, the Biden administration is putting everybody else's interests first. Russia's interests first, Germany's interests first, China's interests first, and American interests last.
You know, in the monologue, I called it the Ping Putin profit plan, because the Biden administration also now is denying permits to mine rare earth materials to make the batteries for the cars that the Democrats say we have to drive. Now, this is something I don't get. This is just going to embolden the Chinese, who are already dominating the rare earth materials market, and they are expanding in Africa. What the Biden administration has said is we're going to rely on allied nations like Canada, Brazil, and Chile. Okay, is there some environmental difference if the rare earth is mined over the border in Canada and not in Montana or Wyoming and Colorado? The Biden administration says, well, we want to focus on battery assembly. Why is that a choice? That makes absolutely no sense. And then add in this, if we're going to rely on South American nations, are we supposed to believe there's no such thing as political instability in South America? We have massive deposits in Alaska, in Texas, in Wyoming, in California and Colorado. Why wouldn't we extract our own resources instead of letting the Chinese run away with the market?
Well, and the notion that the Biden administration said, well, we're going to get them from our allies like Canada. Don't you think Canada is going to be subjected to a lot of Chinese leverage to stop doing what they're doing? What we saw with the pandemic, and in the early days of the Trump administration, and the early days of the pandemic, what we saw was that the Chinese were very willing to use the supply chain as political leverage. So, for example, if a European country dared criticize China over the handling of the pandemic, the Chinese would not, they'd already cornered the market on personal protective equipment and testing equipment. They would deny it to the Europeans. They threatened the President of the United States, Donald Trump, with the following: you criticize us over any aspect of this, we're going to withhold amoxicillin, antibiotics, because we control the supply chain of those. We're going to prohibit them from going to America. So the idea that we would somehow be a more secure nation or in a better world by letting the Chinese run our critical supply chain is a big mistake, because you're giving them the whip hand, and they're showing that they will use it. What they've done to Australia, Andrew, is that the Australians dared ask if they could possibly join 100 other nations into some kind of a World Health Organization investigation into the origin of the virus. The Chinese turned around to the Australians and said, we're going to cut off all imports of Australian beef, Australian wine, Australian, but we are going to bankrupt your agricultural industry for even daring to criticize us. So the Chinese are willing to use any aspect of their trade and economic policy to get their political point across. I think we're such fools to put ourselves on dependency on China.
You know, one thing that we put in the monologue, and I don't think it was widely known, is that long before the Democrats were calling for the Defense Production Act to be used to make medical devices, Trump turned to the DOD and said, look, you go ahead and you start funding these mines for military projects. And this is, again, something that Trump was trying to say to the world, to the Democrats, to the marketplace. Hey, we've got our own rare earth. We're not going to put ourselves at an economic or military strategic disadvantage because some people don't think we should get our own resources out of the ground. All of that has been wiped away by Biden. He's killed the oil pipelines. He's killed the jobs associated. We've had the hack from Russians. Gas prices are through the roof. And now he's telling the world, we are not going to extract rare earth, so everyone can go rely on the Chinese. And if their argument about the environment is it affects people of color more, well, what do you think is going to happen as the Chinese carve up Africa?
Mm-hmm. No, it's just so short-sighted, and I've been at this game long enough to know how sort of reciprocal it is. You know, the Chinese, they want us to be dependent economically and for our critical supply chain. The Russians, they want Germany to be dependent, the German economy to be dependent on Russian oil and natural gas. And while we have these resources, the God-given resources in the United States, oil, natural gas, rare earth minerals, all of those things, why we don't use them is such a folly, because at the end of the day, if the whole issue here is greenhouse gas emissions, do you want to know the best improvement to greenhouse gas emissions that's happened in the last decade or two? American natural gas that was fracked, because American corporations, they substituted clean natural gas for dirty coal. And as a result of that, we're already in compliance with the greenhouse gas emissions of the Paris Accords. Guess who's not? China. And China has no intention of becoming in compliance of anything for at least, I think, 2060 is when they said that they would consider being in compliance. Come on. You know, the people who made these laws are long gone by 2060.
So what about the Romney, Cheney, Kinzinger crowd? I mean, these are people that think it was good, there's a reset. we got rid of Trump. You know, Biden he's a Washington guy. He can be reasoned with. He's doing the most unreasonable things. I can't believe that Mitt Romney's sitting in his office going, this is all good stuff happening now. Or that Liz Cheney's really in agreement with what Biden is doing. These Republicans wanted Trump out as bad as the Democrats, but the media will never give him credit. They will never say, because of Biden, Russia is now being strengthened economically or China's cornering the market. But Trump had it right. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Trump sycophant or anything. If you look at exactly what Trump was saying to Angela Merkel and what he was saying to the world about rare earth, if you want us on EVs, then we're going to have to mine the resources. You can't just say we're going to be on EVs and then we're going to let the Chinese provide, all of the resources. Trump was right on all of this and is probably never going to get the credit.
No, I completely agree. Look, I work for Trump. I know him pretty well. He's a tough boss. And Trump says a lot of stuff. He said a lot of stuff. But what did he do? He would compliment the Russians, the Chinese, everybody, but he was tough as nails on his policy. Fast forward to Joe Biden. He says really tough things. Oh, Vladimir Putin, he's a killer. And Xi Jinping, president of China, he's a thug. But what is he doing? He's rolling over on the policies. The Russians have just hacked American beef and gas that's affected the American consumer. What have we done about it? Oh, we've said, you shouldn't have done that. Well, and the Russians have come back and said, well, they weren't Russian employees who did the hacks. They were just in Russia. Well, tell me about the difference.
Yeah, because okay, sure. If you want to frame it that way. This reminds me of Chuck Schumer's concern about the Iran nuclear deal, that with all the provisions that were being put in place by the Obama administration, or should I say the Obama-Biden administration, which he wants us to get back into, the Iranians were going to develop economically to the point where the sanctions might not have any effect on them. That was Chuck Schumer. He still has it on his official Senate page that he thought that the Iran nuclear deal, the normalizing of trade with even further with European nations, would make it near impossible to have snapback provisions if they were to actually attempt to develop a nuclear weapon. So you look at Obama and Biden strengthening Iran, which they now want to re-engage with. Now they're strengthening China's position on rare earth, which we are so far behind China right now. We could catch up if we actually got ourselves in gear. And now, instead of saying to Germany and our European allies in NATO that maybe you should buy oil and natural gas from your allies like Canada and the United States, they're going to be even more dependent on Russia, and Russia's going to have even more leverage over Germany. And it's kind of funny to read that even CNN is saying these things.
Look, the foreign policy, national security, it's like a shark tank. So when the sharks smell blood in the water, when they see a weakness in their adversary, they all rush in to take their bite out of the fish. Well, we're the fish. So if you look at the Chinese are looking at the Russians are getting away with these cyber attacks and ransomware. The Russians are getting away with telling American naval vessels, no, you can't come into the Black Sea for your annual tour of the Black Sea. We're not going to let you anymore. When the Iranians look and they see the Russians are getting away with this, and look at what the Chinese are getting away with, they're thinking we're going to just drive the hardest bargain. After all, we're Iran. We may never have won a war, but we've never lost a negotiation. And the Chinese, as they see issue after issue where the United States is sort of kicked around all over the world and we don't have any response, and I'm not talking about going to war response, I'm talking about an economic response or a technological response or a cyber response. The Chinese, well, no wonder Joe Biden thinks that the Chinese plan to own us within 10 or 15 years. He's right. And with his kind of policies, they might.
All right, I got to leave it there. We're going to follow this story. Hopefully we can get you back soon on this because this is not going away, KT. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew.
On a side note, one of the supposedly serious candidates for New York City mayor released a campaign ad literally calling for defunding the police, while the Democrats deny their message is defund the police. Maya Wiley is a civil rights activist, college professor, and counsel to commie left-wing Mayor Bill de Blasio. Look at this.
They rammed into peaceful protesters, beat others to the ground, and New York's leaders defended it. But it was an injustice to those of us who know Black Lives Matter. I'm Maya Wiley. As a mom and civil rights lawyer, I've had enough. I'll transform the police.
I've had enough. You could cut this off right now, okay? If this is a serious campaign, if this woman actually becomes mayor of New York, let me tell you something. I'm going to want to feel bad. I don't know if I can when the crime rate goes even higher, but sooner or later, people in New York are going to be screaming for the second coming of Rudy Giuliani. All right, maybe you know the history, maybe you don't, but our next guest and I go way back. Stupor Gear is the host of Stu Does America right here on BlazeTV, and of course can be seen on the Glenn Beck radio program every weekday morning. And still to this day, you, me, Pat, Jeffy, the moment, the moment, as I like to call it, lives on in infamy. I still get people who talk about that Naked Gun 2.5 moment that we had, which I could not believe was really happening.
We're going to you for a question, and all of a sudden there's a flush of a toilet in the background, and dumb Jeffy has left his mic on at the urinal.
I'm laughing like right now as I was then.
Because we were all both like, is someone, it's a typical radio bit, right, to do a flush of a toilet or something in a sound effect booth.
On a morning show,
right? Like rock morning show. Hey. I'm like, what idiot is doing this? And then I realized, of course, the idiot is Jeffy. That's usually the answer.
All right, you guys just have to go and check that out on YouTube. Let's get to the important stuff. I came here to Texas. I wanted to talk to you about this new Texas voting law and the Democrats doing what Democrats do best, which is taking their ball and going home. There's almost no controversy to this new Texas voting law, at least not for people who are observing it, not hyperventilating over alleged racial disparities, other than the souls to the polls provision, which we'll get to in a second. But it kind of echoes a lot of what they did in Georgia. They just said, look, you're not going to have these random drop boxes or drive-through voting places. County election officials aren't going to go do their own thing, and judges aren't going to do their own thing. The state legislature, under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, decides these things, and we're going to make sure that we follow it. This has the media and, of course, the left hyperventilating that Abbott's trying to keep black people from voting or something.
Right. It's like, in 2020, we're pitched that we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? And we need to do something to make voting easier. We didn't know at the time what the pandemic would look like when it came to November. It made some sense to kind of come up with new ideas, new provisions to make it easier for people to vote. Okay, fine. That's how it was pitched to us. This is a one-time pandemic measure. So now we are supposed to act as if this is the codified standard for all time and has been this way for 200 years, and anything that cuts back from the absolute extreme of a pandemic is, some civil rights violation. And it's been consistent, I think, in all of these states where it's been some tightening over the absolute open world of 2020 with the pandemic, but loosening from 2018. All of these have been opening up access for people to vote since 2018, which is really the measure we should be looking at. And, I want people to vote. The New York Times the other day summarized the Republican efforts as a clampdown on voting nationwide. Like, that's just completely absurd. I want the people who are voting to actually be to be legitimate voters. I want to make sure that we don't leave ballot boxes unguarded at 3 a.m. because really bad things can happen. And, the Republic is important to me. The idea that democracy is so important to Democrats, and then they pull what they did here in Texas, it shows they don't care about democracy. These people were elected. Texas decided to elect Republicans who decided to put through this law. That's democracy, right? Democracy is part of a republic in action. And what do? They walk out so that they can't do their job. That's stopping democracy.
But what's amazing is we've gone from election day to election season, right?
Right.
It's not just if you can't be at the polls on time, tell us why, fill out a provisional ballot, make sure that your information is correct, that you've affirmed that you're the voter, and if anybody helped you, that they affirm that they helped you. It's now, let's just count every ballot that shows up in an unmarked van at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we don't even ask for chain of custody reports. You got some ballots, bring them in.
Right.
And then when they say all ballots should be counted, we say all legal ballots should be counted, and that gets the huffing and puffing.
Right. It's one of those things that should not be controversial, but somehow is, like all lives matter, right?
Yeah.
Like, that should not be controversial.
Legal immigration, illegal immigration,
right, exactly.
legal gun purchases, illegal gun purchases.
Yeah, I mean, look, you open, that doesn't mean that every election is stolen, but what it does mean is when you send out millions of ballots to people who didn't even request them, to addresses they don't even live.
And that's now not allowed in the Texas voting law.
Right.
They can't just send out random live ballots.
Right, which is good, right? I mean, look, I think you'd probably be in the same boat. I did the show in New York for years and years and years, and I lived in Pennsylvania. So I had to take a train in. I had to go through New Jersey on a train, get in every day. It was an hour-and-a-half commute. Voting on Election Day was really difficult for me, and basically impossible because I would be covering the election late into the night. So I utilized absentee ballots many times as a guy who works in the media. It's kind of one of the things you very commonly would do. But what I did is I care enough about my vote to send in a ballot request form. I was able to get the ballot in the mail and put it through in a normal, sensible way because I had a reason to not be there on Election Day. This idea that everybody should vote just because it is some sort of moral imperative. Look, I want people to vote, but as the founders talked about, people voting isn't the end game. The end game is get people educated and engaged. If they're educated and engaged, then yes, encourage them to vote. I think a hugely damaging thing was this thing from the 90s of Rock the Vote from MTV. It's like, well, no, don't just rock the vote. No, learn, then vote.
Don't vote because Madonna's wearing a flag
Yes.
and lingerie on TV.
Exactly. You learn, then you vote, and the order is important there. You don't vote and then learn. You learn and you come up with these opinions and you follow the news for years and years, and you have an ideology that's coherent. And then you go to the polls, and because that's what you're supposed to do. It's a responsibility for us to be engaged and then vote, and that's just been lost. It's like this. This happens all the time with, I think, younger kids, where they'll become little activists and they'll go out and they'll raise money for this cause and this cause. And there's something really heartwarming about that.
It's cute.
They're cute.
It's
they
a lemonade
care.
stand.
It is. But in a way, it's also ruining their childhood. It's like, if you really care about
How
something
dare
great.
you?
I know, exactly. It's like, go out there and raise money for whatever charity if you really care about it and you thought about it. Just creating activists for the sake of being activists is not positive.
All right. While we're here, I have to do this. I have to show you something. I wanted to compare your governor to my governor, Phil Murphy, versus Greg Abbott. Your governor's like, I'm going to do the job the federal government won't do when it comes to the border. My governor's handing out illegal immigrant driver's licenses. But I want you, as a Texan, to watch this commercial. This is Phil Murphy's pitch to Democratic voters for the primary. Take a look.
No other state was tested like ours, yet through our loss, we came together.
What's next? Moving forward, boosting small businesses now when they need it most.
Giving our kids the tools to succeed, raising the minimum wage, protecting reproductive rights, making New Jersey work for everyone. No other state has our grit and our heart. And no other state has our future. We're not going back. Let's go.
All right, so he's wearing a mask in the beginning, not wearing a mask at the end of the commercial. Right. He makes it sound like Jersey is just having a great time. Right, people are literally fleeing. He's threatening to raise taxes. He's giving out driver's licenses now to illegal immigrants. The state's budget is in complete shambles, but there he is with his balloon.
The only thing that saves Phil Murphy is that Andrew Cuomo exists. It's like you just want to put.
And I think he's jealous of Cuomo. I bet he's like, damn it.
I know. Well, the $5 million book deal, I'm also, by the way, jealous of. But I wrote a column for the New York Post a few months ago about Andrew Cuomo. And in it, I said that Andrew Cuomo had the single worst coronavirus response in the world. If you put New York as a country, it's the worst in the world. at the time, with the exception of New Jersey, and I
Which
did
is
have
just smaller, right?
Yeah, it's just smaller, and I will say a lot of it's a lot of people coming from New York and infecting New Jersey and Connecticut and everything else. But I mean, look, Phil Murphy. Not a success story here. This is a disaster, and the mask at the beginning is really telling. It's what so many Democrat governors did, which was restrict things that should never have been restricted, like being outdoors. There's no reason to limit people being outdoors.
I for one thought Gretchen Whitmer was right to ban potting soil and seed sales.
Yeah,
because that's a super spreader right there.
Thank you.
He says we're not going back. And that's I don't think a throwaway line. A lot of these Democrat governors, Cuomo, Walz, Brown, Whitmer, Newsom, they like this power. Whereas DeSantis and Abbott are saying, and Tate Reeves in Mississippi, hey, we want to get back to life as we knew it. The Democrats are saying we're not going back.
Yeah, we're not going back to when your relatives were alive. I can tell you that. It's a bizarre stance. It's a bizarre stance because I think what we've seen over this is that there's varying views of this. DeSantis, here in Texas, people are all pissed off at Abbott because they think he didn't go as far as DeSantis, right? It's a funny thing, I think, but when you look at freedom-leaning treatments of the coronavirus situation, it was a difficult situation for these guys. It was a difficult situation for everybody. But if you leaned into freedom and said, look, we're going to make sure we protect nursing homes. We're going to make sure we speed the vaccines as fast as we can. We're going to do the things that we can do, but also realize that we still live in a country that has an active constitution that has been active for a very long time, the longest time in the world, and we're not going to just brush that off. Those people wound up doing considerably better throughout this entire time. And, I think you're totally right. I said as we were going through this, it's a really difficult time, and we all, I think, as individuals made sacrifices. Forget what the government was telling us what to do. We did stay away from our elderly grandparents as much as we could because we wanted to make sure that people were protected. But there's this sort of storm that we went through, a really difficult time. And on the other side is a fight that, you're built for it. Your show is built for it. Talking about the Constitution and keeping these things together because they're going to grab every little ounce of this power that they got during COVID and try to adapt it to anything else they can. And I think you're reading that ad completely right. They don't want to go back because they were able to get all of these things done. It's the same thing they've tried to do with global warming over the years, going back to Woodrow Wilson, the constant state of war, this idea that you can get these powers and you can grab things that aren't available to you in the Constitution because of crisis. Never let a crisis go to waste. This has echoed throughout the progressive world for so long, and this has been the ultimate opportunity. And they're not going to try. They're going to do everything they can to take advantage of it.
I got to leave it there, but I will say this in closing. I'm going to watch you. You watch me. We're going to watch conservative media. I think Ron DeSantis, if Trump doesn't run, I feel like DeSantis is the inevitable guy, but I could be wrong. Stu, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right, here we go. Time now for parting shots. And today's parting shot is at the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, because she's got some good advice for you young women.
What's your advice to women in their 20s and 30s who feel like they have to pack it all in, who are stressed, who are feel like there's a clock ticking and that there's a time shelf on their life?
One, continue with your ambition and don't apologize for it. And continue to believe that you can do whatever you want to do, but also know you have a right to expect things like affordable childcare. You have a right to expect paid family leave when you need to take care of your children or your elderly parents.
Well, if you're following her by example, you're just going to sleep with a much older married man to launch your political career, right? Good advice. We're right. They're wrong. That's the end of the story. The arguments on this television program cannot be broken. Make sure you catch me on SiriusXM Patriot Channel 125, noon to 3 East, 9 and noon West. From Dallas, Texas, I'm Andrew Wilkow. Thanks for watching Blaze TV.